Hi, my name's Layne Vincent. I started programming in 1987 with a language that has now become somewhat obscure called SGML, the Standard Generalized Markup Language. What makes SGML special is that it is the precursor and the father of a language we all know and love, which is HTML, which, as we all know, is also the precursor and the father of CFML. So that's our tie back to ColdFusion. In about 1998, I was working for Northern Telecom, and my boss walked into my office and said, "Hey, do you know how to get information from our database?" Which was Access at the time, from our database over to our web page. And I said, "Well, I can find out." So I did a little research, and I actually started programming in CF with version one, Alair CF version one. So I go way back with those guys. I continued being a CF developer up until 2014. I always had a love for the database side of it, much more so than the CF code side. Um, and in 2014, the company that I was working for, that I was hired into, we had a team of three developers. We had a greenfield project, and one of the three of us took the front end, one of the three of us took the middleware, and one of the three of us took the database. I took the database, and that began my career 10 years ago or so, actually almost 11 years ago now, as a full-time DBA. Since then, I've taken multiple classes and learned the tricks and the ways of my trade. But I've been a full-time DBA now for well over 10 years, and love every minute of it. There's an evolutionary process that happens with small companies, and it affects many different facets of the company. But as a small company grows, those who wear multiple hats wear fewer hats because they hire people to take over some of those roles. Um, so, for instance, what you'll see in a very small company of maybe 5 to 10 people is you'll generally have a single developer who wears all the hats. Well, at some point, he might get lucky, and the boss might say, "Well, okay, we need to bring in somebody else to help you." The real issue on the database side of it is most developers know enough to be dangerous with databases. I don't mean that negatively. I mean that they're quite competent, but they're quite competent at writing queries. They're quite competent at writing stored procedures, but they're not necessarily competent in maintaining a highly active data system. They're not necessarily DBAs. They sometimes call themselves that, and that's okay. But they're not really the guys who know how to go in and tune and not only tune the queries, but tune the server. Um, so a big challenge for companies that are graduating, they're growing, they're vibrant, they're adding people. The big challenge is deciding, ooh, we need to start talking about having a real DBA in here. Initially, they probably don't need him full time. I have several clients where I'm not full time with them. They use me on an ad hoc as needed basis. Most of them, yeah, I would, if I had to guesstimate, I would say roughly 10 hours a month is what a lot of them have me do. They call me, they say, "Hey, we got this query. Can you help us with it?" Sure. "Hey, our systems aren't running properly. Can you help us with it?" Sure. Um, the point at which a company decides they need a full-time DBA is a big step because that's a big salary that you're having to add to your company. Or if you're using consultants like us, that's another cost that's added to the cost of your whatever projects you're working on. My hope with this database or DBA as a service is that we can provide for these small to medium sized companies specifically a bridge from them knowing they need DBA services to them pulling the trigger on hiring a full-time or part-time DBA. There needs to be a bridge in there somewhere. Um, Other challenges that we see frequently with smaller companies, especially, um, I'll use as an example another company that I'm working for. The company was founded in 2005, and many of their databases, their schemas, their table structures, all the things that make up their data systems date back to many, many years ago. Maybe not 2005, but they go back to 2015 or to 2010 or maybe even earlier than that. They've had multiple people working on them over the years. They've had many, many different fingers in the pie, as they say. And so what you have is let me see how to word this correctly. You end up with a database that is inconsistent. Inconsistent with things like naming convention, inconsistent with schema, inconsistent with even things, base level things like backup strategies. When you have multiple people working on the same thing over years, there are so many different ways to do so many different things, and everybody's going to choose their own path. So one of the big challenges that we see with these small companies is they know they have good data. They just can't really get at it because it's very difficult to get at it. One guy 5 years ago decided that denormalizing this table was a good idea. Well, now they're stuck with a denormalized table, and they need to get that fixed. So that's challenge number two is understanding it's technical debt. I realize that term gets thrown around a lot, but that's what this is. We're talking about technical debt for these people. That's challenge number two. It's funny, and I don't know how valuable this will be, but it's funny how one tends to put on the back burner those things that aren't broken. And it's rare that your database is actually broken to the point where it no longer functions. That's rare. That doesn't normally happen. But what does happen over even a relatively short period of time is significant degradation of your data systems in general, but specifically your ability to retrieve data and or to write data. Well, you've heard the term, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. I think that's a fairly common term. With databases, I feel like it's more of a, if it ain't broke, ignore it. So that's what people do.